Yeah, and this is the way I kind of like to think about threats, right? Like abstract away the specific names and think about the things they do and how they do them sort of more collectively. Like if I were threat intelligence czar for my own organization, that's kind of how I would try to think about these things. So like in this top 10, we've got stealers, loaders, remote management tools. We've got some dual use tools in there too, like Impacket and Mimikatz. But like the big thing here is like all of these are known threats, and many of them are predictable ransomware precursors or things that sort of work in the function of helping an adversary achieve their whatever they're trying to accomplish, whether it's stealing data, launching ransomware, mining cryptocurrency, whatever.
All right.
Do a little
What are
live
we
talk.
talking about today?
All right. Yeah, great question. Brian, what are we talking about today?
Mostly, we're going to talk about the mid-year threat detection report, which we just dropped. So we'll talk about sort of the trends, threats, and techniques that we detected across Red Canary land from the first half. But first, um, we're going to talk a little bit about some new Raspberry Robin research from our new friends and colleagues here at Zscaler. Um, and then like really briefly touch on some LummaC2 and maybe just kind of talk about kind of the implications of why that thing is continuing to exist, even though it was supposed to have been taken down by some sort of law enforcement action.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. All right, let's do yeah, let's run through them. I don't think we got a bunch I think this is mostly just discussion fodder.
I
But yeah,
I
you want
slipped
to
the
start with let's start with Raspberry Robin.
yeah, so Raspberry Robin, like a worm-like malware that I think Red Canary first detected and we named. That's why it's got the patented color bird naming convention a few years ago.
Brian,
Um,
I don't think you could say it's patented.
sorry, not patented, not patented or patent pending. Free to
Office
use.
Hours is going to feature 98% less YOLO than it did last week. Carry on.
So a lot of the changes to it are kind of structural. I did go and look to see when was the last time we detected it. We haven't detected it super recently, maybe like later July, early or later in June or early July, we saw some Raspberry Robin. Um, but like Zscaler are much bigger visibility than us in terms of like their global footprint. So we were just sort of looking through there. Some interesting changes to the way it kind of does encryption. And then I think the more interesting part is that it's leveraging that kind of year or two old privilege escalation bug in the Windows file system directory. So it's always interesting to see kind of these older bugs getting abused.
Yeah, and so let's talk Telegram next. That was an interesting one. I feel like this not sure how much y'all had time to dig into that, but that was kind of interesting. This is like very much in the like SEO poisoning, malvertising leads to fake application kind of theme that's been like pretty dominant this year and last.
Yeah, and again, I kind of already touched on this. The interesting thing about seeing more LummaC2 is like it was taken down. So like what remnants of it still exist and why? So clearly they're using Telegram for their command and control infrastructure, so that may have something to do with it. But yeah, still a threat that is showing up. We've detected it post takedown. It still ranks in our top 10 for the first half of the year, which you'll see here in a minute.
Yeah, and the I think there's maybe like an interesting side conversation here, which is like this should have been the poll question for this week. This is a missed opportunity. Sorry, Adam. I'm curious how many people here believe that takedowns are real when it comes to these groups. It's like they kind of tend to be like hydras, where it's just you take them down once, but they like ransomware groups, they either kind of like respawn or rebrand. So that was kind of interesting just hearing about yet another one of these where there's been a pretty big impactful takedown, but they like like water, they find their way back.
And then
I'd be super curious to know if those groups actually have actually developed their all of their infrastructure as code so that standing it back up is relatively straightforward. Like if they're running it as a business, that would be a key part of their business continuity process. They should expect to be getting stuff torn down. They should expect to be moving so that they don't get detected. Like I would guess that taking them down is going to get harder and harder.
and we talked about this with Steph too a couple weeks ago, and it's hard to know like how many people who are using LummaC2 might be rolling some of their own infrastructure and might have been outside of the scope of the takedown effort. So, and then last thing, Palo Alto Networks put out kind of this interesting like Rosetta Stone almost, sort of defining all the groups they track and all their aliases. And as always, I always jump into these things thinking like, all right, cool, I'm finally gonna wrap my head around it. And then I read it and I'm like, I'm more confused than I was when I started. But definitely worth checking out.
I think this is probably bad on me. I think I forgot to drop that link in there. So my kingdom to anyone who finds that and tosses it in the chat.
Yeah, and then I also added this China and American flag just because it seems always topical. But there is, if anyone wants to go do their own kind of research, there's some interesting stuff going on with like NVIDIA chips and claims of backdoors and some very interesting articles out there. I read about it in like a Risky Biz newsletter. I haven't gone back to look more deeply into it, but I'm interested to see sort of where that goes. Thank you, Chris Brook, for the Palo Alto Networks link.
Clutch.
Yeah, on the topic of articles I haven't gotten to yet, I saw an article that I mean to go back and look at. The North Korean IT employees. There was an interview from the perspective of one of the guys that actually got implanted, telling the story from the actual adversarial side.
Oh, neat.
Super interesting. Yeah, I think there was like an arrest of someone related to that I saw pass across the news wires, but I'd need to look more closely into that.
Yeah, you guys are talking. I want to see if I can find that.
All right, cool. Well, while you do that, all right, let's move on. So Brian, this is the second year now that we've done a formal mid-year update to our beloved threat detection report.
Yep.
So, yeah. So always neat to see these. And I think, particularly since we cover the monthly intel insights here, I think hopefully for this audience, I don't think there'll be a ton, at least for our like repeat guests. There probably won't be a whole bunch here that's new, but it is neat to see kind of like what's moved up and down and to the side. So kind of let you take us through this, starting with identity detection. And like I've got some questions here, which you can probably predict, but
yeah, so identity detections are way, way up. As you can see, like particularly as we moved into June, they really exploded. And at face value, you might think, uh-oh, this is very concerning. But like we dug into this obviously to figure out why, because whenever I see jumps like this, I'm skeptical that it's just like bad guys are targeting thing more often. So if you click into this next slide, like what is going on here? So first and foremost, like to get the kind of clerical thing out of the way, like many of our identity detections end up being mapped back to T1078.004 cloud accounts, which is a sub technique of valid accounts and MITRE ATT&CK. And the reason is because like it's our best mapping option. When we're doing identity detection, we're looking at folks who are trying to log in through a cloud hosted IDP into some other cloud hosted resource. So cloud accounts is really our best option for mapping those. And like a big reason for why we're seeing this increase doesn't necessarily have to do with bad guys targeting identities. I mean, obviously that's the thing we're detecting, but it has a lot to do with sort of increased customer adoption of our identity products. So more people bought them. And then also we've started using, and you guys have talked about this a ton here with Sam and other folks, like as we've really started to operationalize the way we're using custom AI agents across our identity detection and response products, like our detection coverage has expanded really aggressively, and particularly some things that happened in June around like the way we're leveraging these user baseline reports that are really good at detecting anomalous logins have caused this skyrocket. Now, the one caveat I will offer there is like these logins aren't always malicious, but they are certainly risky. And these sort of anomalous logins are often the starting point for a breach, but they are not always malicious, right? Like it might be a user running a consumer VPN product on an asset, but it's a policy violation, represents a risk, but at the end of the day, it was ultimately a legit login.
yeah, I think we can talk a little bit more about that too, because this has been like, I mean, a pretty fundamental difference between, particularly when it comes to, I'd say, like our threat detection reporting in particular, where I think for us, being so heavy on the security operations side, and in particular, like detection and response, our reporting in particular tends to skew really heavily towards threats where we have a really high degree of confidence that like those things have been convicted, they're bad. And so I think that's, I don't know, an interesting thing to keep an eye on, like from my perspective, at least, as we continue to do this type of reporting, because I do think, well, I think we know that a lot of what we find in the identity space is, like you said, it's some of those things are confirmed to be bad, but overwhelmingly what we're trying to find is like, risk across the spectrum in all these different areas, which is, far more difficult to pin down.
Yeah, I mean, I think historically we were really, really laser focused on making sure that like detections were accurate and false positive rates were super low. And we're still, pretty dedicated to that. But I think in sort of identity and cloud land, you kind of have to reevaluate the formula that you're going for and accept more like finding things that are anomalous but not confirmed bad versus like making sure everything you send out is like definitely a threat and worth acting on.
Hey, when we look at that uptick in incidents last month, is that just sheer volume of incidents that we've identified, or is that normalized for the number of identities that we're actually protecting?
I'm so glad you asked that. So it is just raw detection volume. Keith and I have a handy spreadsheet where we track like threats per asset. And given that bump in June, and the crazy thing about the threats per asset number is it's been steady for like 3 years. I have a feeling and that's sort of our attempt to normalize like threat per capita, I guess you could say. And I have a feeling that when we rerun those numbers, which we'll probably do at the end of the year, we typically do it as part of the full threat detection report. I have a feeling that what we're going to find is that that number has gone up.
And I'd be curious in that increase that you're anticipating, how many of those, like if you just compared year over year, the detectors that existed last year and this year, whether we saw an increase and whether that increase is a result of more effective detection or if it's a result of actual more malicious activity going on.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to look into. I'm not sure without having the numbers in front of me at the moment what that will look like.
Right on. Be interested to see what you guys come up with there.
All right, all right, so let's talk, so we kind of hit the prevailing trends. So let's hit the threats. So like what should we take away from this one?
So like, I mean, interestingly, the thing that stood out to me immediately, perhaps selfishly, is just the sheer number of color birds that are on this list is super interesting to me. But that's not really like important actionable detail. Um, but like, we're still seeing LummaC2 in the top 10. That's mostly a hangover from pre-takedown activity. Um, Mocha Mannequin and Node Init Rad are closely bound to one another. Scarlet Goldfinch and Sock Gullish are pretty similar threats too. They both sort of deliver via fake uploads or fake browser updates. So like Amber Albatross is a stealer-like threat that kind of comes in by way of potentially unwanted programs and stuff like that. There's nothing on this list that's shocking to me. Like RMM tools like Net Support Manager I'm seeing a lot of talk across the industry about the problem that those are causing for organizations as like adversaries are just using these like fully functioned remote monitoring tools to do a lot of the stealing and the legwork of their malware operations as opposed to the past.
Someone hold me accountable here, but I do think I feel like we're 20 some episodes overdue probably for like a dive on RMM tools. I think that would be super interesting because I know like it's a thing we've kind of been looking for and in general concerned about, I think as long as Red Canary has existed. But that rise over the last year or two has been really precipitous. And I guess it seems like this is one of those things where like which one makes this list is way less important than the fact that like one of those is almost always present in a lot of these like really impactful intrusions or breaches. It's like
a lot of the paste and run stuff is leading directly to these RMM tools. We did a whole hour on remote monitoring management tools in a detection series webinar within the last year. If someone wants to go back and dig that up and share it, I believe it was remote access tools is what we called it, or remote access software. Can't remember, but yeah. So you can watch that in the meantime before we explore it in office hours.
Yeah, and it definitely, I mean, it it's one of your, it's one of the call out themes for sure, right? Alongside stealers and loaders, which is, I think, again, not a lot new here, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I think we did a grouping like this for the annual TDR, and I believe it looked remarkably similar.
Yeah, and this is the way I kind of like to think about threats, right? Like abstract away the specific names and think about the things they do and how they do them sort of more collectively. Like if I were threat intelligence czar for my own organization, that's kind of how I would try to think about these things. So like in this top 10, we've got stealers, loaders, remote management tools. We've got some dual use tools in there too, like Impacket and Mimikatz. But like the big thing here is like all of these are known threats, and many of them are predictable ransomware precursors or things that sort of work in the function of helping an adversary achieve their whatever they're trying to accomplish, whether it's stealing data, launching ransomware, mining cryptocurrency, whatever. And then next slide, like the ways they get in are pretty predictable too, right? So we're seeing initial access via potentially unwanted programs, like in the case of Amber Albatross, but also like compromised browser extensions, fake browser updates for Sock Golish and Scarlet Goldfinch. And then, these malvertising and SEO and other web-based delivery mechanisms are really prominent. And then, of course, like you guys have talked about this ad nauseum in office hours, but like it seems like everybody is adopting these paste and run, click fix, fake captcha schemes to gain initial execution and access.
I'd like to pause here and first I'd say, like, we will have a little bit of time at the end today. So like, if anyone has any questions related to the mid-year TDR, but I'd say also just in general, like threat detection, statistics, things like that. We'll leave some time at the end for a little bit of a light AMA, but I want to pause here and talk through the threats in aggregate. Cause like, as I'm looking through this, you kind of have like always love to think through these and just kind of take a step back and say, hey, like what are the fewest number of controls I can put down to kind of get in front of this? And these, like, just off the top of my head, this is an interesting list. And like, Dave, curious your perspective here, but I'm thinking like app control and like really strong, network-based detection and response. And I mean by that, like DNS firewall, coupled with like proxy. There's a little bit of bleed over here between like the browser side of things and like traditional network. But I mean, and also just kind of thinking back to the last, 6 or however many months of these discussions we have, like put a couple of things in place and take a whole bunch of this attack surface away.
Yeah, I mean the thing that's the sort of is daunting about this list is when I look at how you protect against all these things, it all boils down to taking control out of the end user's hands, right? You want to lock down what they're allowed to install. You want to take away admin privileges, right? You want to control that environment and control where the updates are coming from. And that creates a user experience it's pretty high friction in a lot of cases. And it's a really hard cultural battle to win if the company hasn't been stood up that way. And unfortunately, like I think like every time we have this show and I see this, I think, man, this is the same thing over and over and over again. And it's the same thing over and over again because it's still working. And I think that like the bigger the body of data is that reinforces that this is how bad things happen in your organization, the more compelling the controls around end users become. But like the battlefield is still going to be a cultural battlefield. And I'm going to take a brief side tour here. Like we just onboarded this last week on Friday to Zscaler. And if there's ever a time when there's friction in your life, it's when you're moving under a new set of controls. And I can tell you that my experience so far has been that their support function and the responsiveness of that is absolutely essential for tight controls to be a viable solution in your organization. And I updated my machine, had some errant firewall rules that just killed me dead in the water, and I was up and running in 5 minutes. That responsiveness makes it way more palatable, but you can't look at this problem from just a controls perspective. You have to look at it from a people and culture perspective as well. And you've got to staff your organization in a way that you can get these controls out of people's way as quickly as they get in their way. And you've got to have a plan for how you're going to do that. So
Yeah, it
it's
is.
a complicated problem.
Yeah, when we kind of talk about, and used to just kind of think about these as like positive security controls, but like, app whitelisting or app control in general,
Mhm.
like those are, those are hands down the most effective things I think, we've ever seen. When you look at our customers who have those types of things deployed and in a high enforcement posture and customers who don't, it's like they are living in different worlds. But to your point, like it's as much, it's probably a 75% IT buy-in and 25%, security operations buy-in, because like it's a very real cost to that. But I'd say like, there's some very real benefits too, right? So it definitely, land of trade-offs as is always the case. But I don't know, I think that's one that's like really worth kind of thinking through and debating, because it is like, if you can get there, you're kind of, your world has changed forever in terms of just like the nature of the threats you have to worry about.
And to
Right.
underscore something that Dave was saying, like these are forever problems too, right? Like they're forever problems for which a complicated solution exists, and that's why they remain forever problems. Like I was writing about 4 out of the 5 of these 15 years ago when I was 22 years old at Threat Post, right? The only one here that's new is paste and run, and it's not even really new, because what happens in the paste and run scheme is it's just a way to get you to execute a PowerShell or an MSHTA script. And those two techniques have been in our top 10 techniques for 7 years, right? Like, so, it's just what works keeps working, I guess.
Yeah. And there's like a great side conversation going here, but just kind of looking through the, just the amount of effort that's spent on getting, I'd say like, well, there's two kind of threads here going. One is just like the the gravitational pull of compliance. And I guess, in this vein too, like what that takes away from other efforts. Uh, but I do like definitely like Jim's comment where it's, that users don't know or don't understand how, like the complexity or the danger when they're just going about their work. And frankly, maybe there's a good argument to be made that maybe they shouldn't. Dave, I think you always stuck with me when you told me, like make the only way the safe way. And so it's like um, some of it is taking control out of the user's hands, but like at the same time, it's like being thoughtful about that and saying, hey, like what's the fastest way for somebody to get from point A to point B? How do I ensure the safety of that path? And as an end user, I personally appreciate that trade-off. I don't have to figure out how to do so many things or think so much about them, and I also don't have to stop at every step along the way. I wonder if I'm going to do some real harm. So,
But you
Right.
also understand them, Keith. Like that's a key difference, right? Like when I run into something that's blocked, I'm like, oh, rats, but I get why they're doing this. Like there's a lot of people in an organization that don't know why they're doing it. They just think they're being inconvenienced.
Right. And I think the part that gets missed in those conversations around those preventative controls is that the total cost of ownership includes the people necessary to staff getting folks around those controls when they inevitably have an unexpected consequence, right?
yep.
We've been transitioning from, an AWS VPN over to Zscaler solutions. And, our network connectivity was designed and it's been working flawlessly for years, but it's designed a little bit differently than Zscaler's ZPA expects it to be. And so you've got to have folks there ready to respond that know the tools that are responsive in a timely fashion. And so far, like we have not had to put people in any kind of bypass mode, but we've had to staff it pretty seriously.
Yeah.
And that's a burden that a lot of companies can't afford. And I don't know if we'll ever get past that from a technical perspective, because the systems that we work in on a daily basis are so complicated that it's impossible to imagine all the configuration permutations.
Yeah, definitely complex. Well, I appreciate everyone indulging little sidebar. And I do want to move. So we're gonna move into the last section here, which is just kind of highlighting some techniques. And I think this kind of dovetails nicely with what we're just talking about, which is just kind of going a click deeper behind those threats and understanding exactly what's happening, which I think is, at least for like purposes of this discussion is like most useful for figuring out how you prevent these things.
Yeah, and longtime readers of Red Canary content, including the threat detection reports, will notice immediately that once again, the overwhelming vast majority of this list are techniques that have been in our top 10 for a while. Cloud accounts and email forwarding rules, somewhat new, but 18 months or so, they've been pretty steady here. PowerShell has been 1, 2, or 3 basically every year. Same with like Command Shell, Ingress tool transfer. The two things here that stand out immediately because they're new and we rarely get new techniques are data from cloud storage and disable or modify cloud firewall. And on the next slide, we'll kind of talk through why that's happening.
Before you go there,
Oh,
before you
yeah.
go there, what's an example of an ingress tool transfer?
So a lot of time, so this couples really closely with PowerShell because a lot of the PowerShell activity you'll see is PowerShell reaching out to an external resource and pulling in a tool. Or no, sorry, ingress is when it's happening within a network, but same idea, right? So a lot of times it's like PowerShell moving things around within a network is ingress tool transfer.
Okay.
All right, data from cloud storage and disable or modify cloud firewall. So this is a really, really similar story to what's happening with cloud accounts. This increase has a lot to do with increases in detection coverage and customer adoption of these different tools. And both of these are really similar, right? So data from cloud storage, most of the time is like someone configuring an S3 bucket to be public. Again, a case where like that is an intended functionality of an S3 bucket. It may be something that you're doing on purpose. However, lots and lots of bad breaches start from an S3 bucket being hanging out there on the open internet. And then disable or modify cloud firewall is kind of a collective term for just ways that people are configuring cloud resources to allow really permissive external access to them. Again, this is the sort of thing that you might be doing on purpose, and that's fine. But it's also the sort of thing that you might have done on accident, which can be very bad. And it also, in both cases, like it could be adversaries doing these things after they gain access to your cloud environment. So it's yet again another example of where we've had to accept this idea of detecting risks because they are risky, and then sorting out whether or not they are sort of bona fide threats as we're like sort of writing up detection timelines for this stuff. I think I kind of already walked through the 4 different ways that this happens, but basically like it can be intended, it can be an accidental misconfiguration, or it can be sort of an overtly malicious act that's being taken on behalf of an adversary of some kind.
So I am curious how much of these in particular, do we have good data? I know like, for the annual report, we kind of, and I know we feel, different ways about this in terms of confidence, but like, do we have good data on how much of this is testing and how much of this is like how much of the cloud account stuff in particular, thinking through like modifications to firewall policies and like cloud control plane and things like that. This has always been a big curiosity because I know for there was a good amount of time where we saw that. And I think, we felt like it was exclusively or almost exclusively like testing or red team activity. And it was like very rarely adversary activity. I know that's changed. And a lot of that is just, seeing more of it and broader scope. And to your point, like we're looking in more places for more things. But curious, like, do we have anything sitting in the data that tells us like what percentage of this in particular is testing?
So testing is filtered. So if a customer goes in and said this was sanctioned, it was testing, then we filter that data out. Even so, they have to go and do that, and they don't necessarily have any incentive to do that. I think, like based on my spot checking around through these detections, I think a decent amount of it is still testing, but like I would still say it is worth detecting this stuff regardless. Now, if you put me in charge of classifications, I would try to think through a new way of classifying these things. Right now, they're classified malicious or suspicious. I would try and think through a way of having like some sort of risk-based system that we can apply to these, just to sort of zero in more, because it is really hard to know how much is testing, especially if customers are just like, oh, it's all good, closed detection, remediated. They're not worried about it. Like they don't necessarily click that next button that says like this was sanctioned testing.
Yeah, there is like definitely a thought experiment that's really interesting in terms of how to, I mean, the same way, we and others like apply risk scores to people, right? Like we can kind of objectively score the risk associated with your account and Dave's, right? And over time, in terms of like, weighting more for things you have access to if you're a highly privileged user, and like the types of data that you have access to and the behaviors you exhibit, it kind of feels like in the cloud space, like cloud resources or cloud assets. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if between now and next year's report, we've got some way to untangle that a little bit. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been able to really spot check, but I've found a decent mix of things that looked malicious and things that looked like testing.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I appreciate it. Well, everyone, I think, appreciate the discussion here. And I'm just kind of scrolling through the chat real fast to see if there's anything else that we want to kind of call out or talk through here in a few minutes of overtime. But I think we, and I do see this question about like DLP controls for unauthorized, like S3 based exfil. So that's a pretty specific one, and I'm not sure. I don't know if any of us have enough enough expertise on the fly to talk through that. However, we will here in a couple of weeks have some folks coming on to join us, like from our cloud threat research team, and I think that might be so we're going to stash that question and see if maybe
from the virtual machine environment.
Yeah, and in
we've
particular,
dug
like the
deeply.
DLP aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, we've kind of dug deeply into that internally here. I have to dig out what we're thinking of here, but I don't know if we've ever found any real way to do that without an agent on the VM. I mean, it's true that the traffic to AWS S3 is going to transit the host machine, but I'm happy to look back into that and see what we came up with there.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, and I know that in particular, so to Chris's point, that's I think coming up here in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking specifically about Azure and kind of threat hunting across the Azure environment to include some of like the block storage, but also control plane and other activities. So that'll be an interesting one. It sounds like we've got a handful of folks here who are passionate about or interested. So perhaps we'll pull in some other voices for that one too. That'd be neat. Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, everyone. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all coming. This has been an awesome chat, and looks like I know we've got a couple things. We're going to follow up with some of you who just kind of had questions or wanted to talk further about this, because I think there's like a really interesting discussion here, and we will, Jacob, absolutely keep this going. So thank you all so much for sticking with us. Appreciate it, and we will see you next week. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.